Hey there, everybody. Adam Savage here in my cave with some Q&A, a MythBusters question today. I've been answering these from time to time, submitted by tested patrons, and answered in this format here in my cave. And today's question is actually two questions. There we go. That's a better. All right. Today's question is two questions. And these two questions come from tested patrons, Kyle Bennett, with an extra E, so maybe it's Benetti, and Justin Bacconi. Kyle's question goes like this. How did the camera and safety crew size change over the years? In the early episodes, it seemed like it was a small crew with limited resources. They point out that when Buster's leg fell off in the hammer myth, we dove into the water to search for it. In the later episodes, we had dive crews. And Justin's question is very similar. He says, I know you've mentioned before that anytime you and the team were out on location, you always cleaned up after yourselves. Who actually cleaned the location sites after each myth? Was it the 5 or 6 of you in the beginning and then maybe a special team in the later seasons? Or did you all just pitch in? I've always wondered, especially after some of the big ones like cleaning cement from a truck or the Lego ball or anything that blows up. Yes, the basic answer to both your questions is absolutely. What you surmised in the beginning years that we had a smaller crew than we had in later years is totally true. And that's pretty normal for a show. You're gonna, as you have a show that is a successful show like ours was, it becomes a revenue stream for Discovery, for the parent channel. And the parent channel wants to do things to augment and help that franchise make money for them. So, the budgets got bigger, which seems totally normal. But these days, what I'm hearing about television is that when a show does well in its first season, the networks are tending, in some of the stories I've heard, to make the second year budgets smaller, which is kind of enraging. Just personally, the idea of having a show that does well enough to get awarded a second season and then be told you got to do it with less resources makes me a little crazy. I mean, I understand capitalism, but for crying out loud. So, let's go back to MythBusters' early days. In the very first pilots of MythBusters, which were shot in the late spring and summer of 2002, almost 20 years ago now, we had a producer, we had a production manager, Caroline Odsent. We had camera, Paul Henry, and sound, Jude, Paul's amazing wife. And I think that was it. I think it was 4 people plus me and Jamie's shop assistant, Chris Rocha. Yeah, except for some added help we reached out to here and there for some fabrication stuff. That was the crew for the pilots. It was tiny. And unlike regular episodes of MythBusters, when we were later in production, in those episodes, we would often do a story at a time, one story at a time. When we were shooting the pilots, we shot, I think, 10 separate myths, but we spent 6 weeks shooting them, but a full front month of that was just lining up the executions, and then 2 full weeks of executing every story, doing the set of experiments. So it was a lot of building. Basically, we were shooting out of order for the pilots because we didn't know what the show was. That's what happens when you're making a pilot. You kind of shoot everything and you get into the edit room. And if you're ever working on a show that you care about and you don't know what you can conceive of a show and you can film that conception. But the one thing I will guarantee you without knowing anything about you or your idea is that the final product you end up with is only passingly going to resemble your original concept. I mean, there's going to be obviously a parity, but as you develop your concept, you're going to discover things you didn't know about the thing that you're making, and it's going to change and it's going to shift. That happens with every piece of art. That happens with every execution of creativity. And that kind of freedom was really engendered by having a small crew, which we still had when MythBusters kicked into production in the spring of 2003. So we shot those pilots beyond productions in Sydney, Australia. It spent 7 months cutting them. And it's always long. First of all, it's always long to cut that first cut because you just don't know what you're putting all the stuff out there and you're kind of finding out what the structure is underneath. Also, the first time you witness that first cut, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be awful. And you just have to embrace the suck and swim through it. It is really... I have to remind myself, when MythBusters Jr., I saw the first rough pass of the first episode of MythBusters Jr., I was like, we've made a piece of garbage, and we hadn't. I just had to remind myself that the first one looks... Same thing with Savage Builds. First cut of Savage Builds, I was like, oh, wow, what are we doing wrong? And again, it's not that we were doing anything wrong. It's we're finding the show within the show. So we started with Jamie and I, plus Carrie, plus we had main camera and second camera. I was young Tim Elwood, I believe, if I remember correctly. Plus sound, main camera, second camera, sound. So it was plus, I think, 2 production managers, or a producer and a production manager. So it was probably more like 6 or 7 people in the first season. Ultimately, by the 4th season, I think we had hit our stride in terms of the amount of crew. By the 4th season, Carrie, Tori, and Grant were now over at M7. They had their own production crew, which was 2 producers, camera, sound, second camera. And we had the same thing, plus a couple of extra people. The whole MythBusters family for most of our run was about somewhere right around 20 people. Which for television is still very small. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure some of the stuff that Rob Corddry shoots with his friends are even smaller. And I think that like there's something engendered by a small crew. There's often a lot more creative freedom. I'm not saying there's not more creative freedom, because you could have a big crew and do the best things in the world if you know them really well. It's why people like Fincher and Cameron and Favreau work with the same people over and over, because they build this beautiful shorthand and they really understand what their roles are. I got to spend some time with Jason Reitman on in his process of working on the new Ghostbusters film, and I met a lot of the crew to find that, you know, most of them have been working with Jason since the beginning of his film career. There's a shorthand with the crew that's just one of the most invaluable things you could ever have. When we went and made Dangerous Toys, we had a crew of like 35 people. There was a video village. There's just all this stuff that Jamie and I weren't used to. And I look, I'm not begrudging that model. That's one way you make reality television. But for me, I prefer the more hand-hewn, close-knit approach. That's the environment that I thrive in. So Savage Builds was, what was that crew? Maybe 15 people? Yeah, maybe 13. I mean, it was a nice, light crew. The thing that I find most astounding is that when the crew showed up for shooting those pilots, Jamie and I had no idea what it was about to shoot a television show. I mean, we'd shot television shows from the side of production, but this kind of indie, like, let's see what kind of show we can make out of this. We had no idea what to expect, but the fact that it was such a small crew meant that the experience of shooting those pilots in the early seasons was really intimate in a way that I think is intrinsic to how the show grew up. And I think it would have been very different if we had started right off the bat with a kind of a modern 35-person crew. That I would have felt a lot less freedom to kind of cut loose and try weird stuff. But I'm so grateful for that. There are a couple of things about MythBusters germination that I'm really grateful for. One is all of our camera people just are so delightful to work with, and you can ask all of us hosts, everybody. There's something about having a relationship with your camera person that just makes the work that you do on camera so much better. So much better. That and the small crew. So, but you were also asking who did that cleaning up. Yes, in the early years, for at least the first 4 or 5 seasons, us hosts were always absolutely doing all the cleanup alongside our crew. As the demands upon all of us grew, we delegated more and more of that. And by demands, I mean, we had to travel for doing appearances for Discovery, often in the middle of production, which meant that you'd have to leave on a Friday, fly somewhere in the country Saturday, Sunday, do an appearance, come home Monday. Then there's also college appearances, which is a lucrative revenue stream that television hosts can afford themselves of and should and do. And so all of us hosts were traveling a lot during those early and mid years, doing appearances, bringing in extra income. And also, working and filming all day long, every single day. As the crews got bigger and the budgets got bigger, it made less sense for the hosts to be sitting there until 8 o'clock at night sweeping up. So we had to be pretty the next morning. I feel like I'm giving an excuse for the fact that we didn't clean up, but there are good and bad executions of one's time. At this stage in my life, I will be happy to delegate busy work that is not the best use of my filming, building, construction time. The best use is this, me talking to you directly on the camera. That being said, during COVID, I haven't had any of that help, so it's all been me. We've been back to basics, but so has the whole world. I think somewhere in there is the answer either of you might have been looking for. I hope so. Thank you for letting me walk down memory lane about the early crews and the early days of MythBusters. I really appreciate it. Yes, we left every location as good or better than we found it, and very few things made the show, how do I say this? That is one of the reasons we had so much flexibility with all of the places we filmed here in the Bay Area, because we built, developed, and maintained excellent relationships with all of those venues. And those relationships were maintained by an incredible crack team of producers. Eric Haven, John Hunt, Claire Mandel, Jax Marker, I'm going to forget some, Dennis Kwan, Alice Dallow, Linda Wolkovich. Did I say Linda already? Linda deserves 2 mentions. She made sure the vendors were always happy. She was so good about making sure wherever we were filming that the people whose property we were on were delighted with how the whole shoot went. Yeah, that's money in the bank. Keeping your word and being reliable, seriously, which is all that we were doing. Years later, when we would be like, oh, this experiment didn't go the way we thought it did, we need a totally different location on 8 hours notice. How are we going to get the permitting going? Well, when you've built great relationships with every place you've ever filmed, that becomes a much easier problem to solve. Thanks for that great question. Both of you, Justin and Kyle. Tested patrons, keep submitting your questions. I will keep answering them here on the channel. Thank you so much, guys. Stay safe. Keep wearing your masks just a little longer. I'll see you on the other side.